All right, we are on air. It is Thursday, September 6th. I was like, it's not August anymore. Happy new month, everyone. This is our first meeting after the backdrop code freeze. So most of today's agenda is going to be talking about what got in and what didn't get in and what we can still do between now and release. But before we get to backdrop itself, I just wanted to give a quick update on contributed projects. We have 2 new contrib projects, Rate and Routing Debug. Both had releases in the last week, so thanks everybody for working on those. All right, let's turn it over to Nate to review what went into backdrop.
All right. Oh man, we've got so many things that are happening. So like Jen said, it's post-feature freeze. So we now have 10 days, 9 days actually, I guess, until September 15th, which is the release of Backdrop 1.11. And we had a mad dash, it shouldn't be too surprising, at the end of the release cycle and completed a whole bunch of things, some of which have minor follow-ups that we'll need to do a little bit of polishing and iteration on. But yeah, let's go through our hit list here of major items that we've been targeting for 1.11 and see how we did. Okay, let's see. These have been rearranged slightly, but I guess we'll start maybe with the exciting ones here. Sorry. First of all, let's talk about the bug fix release. Sorry, let's rewind a little bit. 1.10.2 is the bug fix release for 1.10, and it has been our intention to make a release this past week, but we got caught up with the feature freeze mad dash rush. So we're still hoping to cut a release for 1.10.2 pretty much immediately. I don't think there's anything holding us up. It's just a matter of scheduling it. Yeah, maybe today, exactly. So we might cut 1.10.2 later today. There's a dozen or so issues that have been completed that are in the bug fix queue. So we'd like to get that cut and pushed out just to make it available for everybody. Okay, now we'll go on to 1.11. 1.11 will be coming out here in 9 days. And we have a bucket full of awesome new things that got completed in the last week before feature freeze. First of all, issue 3062, bringing back node preview, was carried across the finish line. And that enables the ability to look at a preview of a piece of content before it is saved on the front end of the site. What happens is the node is saved into the temp store temporarily, and then you go and look at the front end of the site and it loads the node as though it had been saved. So you can have a preview before you even create a piece of content for the first time, before it's saved into into the real database, into the node table. So there's a follow-up, or there should be a follow-up to improve the CSS appearance of the little banner that runs across the bottom of the screen that allows you to save the piece of content or go back to the editing screen, as well as toggle between different view modes. We don't actually have a follow-up for that one yet, but we need to create one, I think, just because we know that there's opportunities for improving it, but we don't actually have any suggested designs as of yet. So, but I think it would be good to keep tabs on it nonetheless, to keep track of trying to improve that visually just a little bit. Minor feature, use EXIF data to rotate images, issue 2887. That one has been merged. I don't think there's much to say about that one. That's a handy feature for people uploading from their phones. Rich text editor file browser, making it so that you can browse and reuse images that are provided via a configurable view, issue 3134. That one was completed and merged in this past week. There is a follow-up that HerbDuel filed 3276 that is, there's a bug sometimes when updating images, if you follow certain steps, replacing an image with another one sometimes causes a JavaScript error. So we need to get that one resolved before 1.12 for certain, because that's not a friendly bug to have in one of our key features for 1.12. So 3276 could definitely use some eyeballs figuring out why that JavaScript error occurs and how we can fix it. Let's see. Contact module. Contact module didn't actually have any changes this past week, but I'll reiterate it again. It did actually. The last two items, permissions on the contact settings form, issue 3190, and better messaging for saving contact module settings, 2257. Both of those were merged prior to feature freeze. So that's awesome. Thanks again, OP, for all of your work putting together improvements for contact module. We got in all of the key ones, although I know that there's still some another 5 issues or so that OP has on his wish list to make contact module more friendly for the out-of-box experience. Let's see, color module improvements, issue 1905. There hasn't been any changes to this issue in the past week, but we do have some follow-ups, 3257, allowing for greater flexibility within the color form. That one, Joseph and I have been going back and forth on that one, whether or not we need to change something there. There's some good ideas that we might trim down that pull request to just improve the code styling just a little bit. And issue 3209 is a follow-up for adding predefined color schemes to Basis out of the box. So Basis is now colorizable, but it doesn't include any out-of-the-box themes. This issue 3209 can still be done before feature freeze because it's not actually adding any real code, if you will. It's just adding some predefined lists of colors, basically. So considering the very low risk of that one and it not actually impacting any functionality anywhere, that one is still a candidate for 1.12. It would be nice to get that completed, just because if it's one of our key features for 1.12, it would be nice if it were polished and ready for easy, nice to look at options. Okay, another feature that got in issue number 100, which is one of our oldest issues and one of the most surprising ones to make it this release, because we didn't have it noted in the agenda for most of the release cycle, but pageless nodes, aka rabbit hole type functionality, was merged into issue number 100. That makes it so that we have a trimmed down functionality that's akin to rabbit hole, that you can enable per content type the ability to just hide the page path from the front end or from your visitors. It's not as flexible as rabbit hole. You don't have options for redirecting or for showing different types of page not found options. It merely makes the path basically disappear for users that don't have the view pathless nodes permission. I think that's it. View pathless. I can't quite remember what the terminology was there. We did have a lot of back and forth on wording there. That was the greatest contention in that issue, was figuring out what to name things. But anyway, it's very exciting. We will need to do some work on rabbit hole to make it so that rabbit hole and that new feature don't conflict too badly. What will end up happening right now, if you already have rabbit hole on your site and you upgrade, rabbit hole continues to be enabled and nothing changes essentially. But now there are 2 ways to block access to a node's path. You can either use rabbit hole as you were using previously, or you can use this new core option. And if either one of them are enabled, it will block access to the node path. I would not really recommend doing both at the same time. I think in that case, rabbit hole will win, but they don't actually cause problems with each other. But it would be good if rabbit hole, at the very least, did something like hid the core option, because it provides its own option that kind of takes precedence. Let's see. We also have a follow-up that was filed after that was merged, issue 3275, as a usability improvement / bug, that if a user doesn't have access to view the node that they just created, then we need to redirect back to the edit form rather than taking them to a page that says the page is not found, because that's just confusing. So that issue is 3275, a bug that needs to be resolved in the next week before we release 1.12. Let's see. I also got a question here from Gitter that's like, what's the last possible date for adding predefined color schemes to basis, issue 3209? Well, last possible date is probably the day before release, probably the 14th. I don't really like merging things on the day of release. It just doesn't leave enough. It's prone to causing accidents doing that. So the 14th is probably the last date for that. Oh, sorry. Yes, and the release of 1.11, not 1.12. Sorry. Okay, that's it for pageless nodes. Next up, let's see. Things that didn't quite get done. We had a real strong push right at the end of the cycle for adding fieldable file bundles, which is a major component of file entity module and media module from 777. That's issue 2632. We got to the point that all tests were passing. We fixed merge conflicts. We had a lot of great code reviews. But that feature just wasn't quite ready for 1.11. It could be one of our first issues for 1.12. It really is in excellent shape, but it's a massive, massive amount of code. And I think we felt that we weren't ready to, or we weren't going to try to attempt to rush in that massive porting of file entity into core on such short notice. The good news is that because most of it is a straight port out of 777, most of its functionality has been extensively tested in the 777 cycle, and this is mostly just a cross port over to Backdrop. The bad news is that because it's a direct cross port over from 777, we inherited several usability problems from the 777 version, and so the current feedback in that issue is about fixing some of the problems that have existed throughout the entire 777 cycle and seeing if we can fix those as part of this, including fieldable files in core. So issue 2632, not making it into 1.11, it's a great candidate for 1.12. And if you would like to post some feedback there, there's a lot of activity and discussion happening on that issue currently. Next up, core updates. Core updates, we have a big meta issue at 2018. The concept that we would like to make it so that Backdrop has the ability to do automatic updates eventually. What we have for 1.12, though, is issue 3105 was completed, which makes it so that Backdrop can update core in the same way that it can update contrib modules. It now can self-update Backdrop itself using the same mechanism that we previously used only for contrib modules. The thing about it, though, is that we need to be able to test it as a complete system with all of backdropcms.org, the packager, and people's local Backdrop instances. We wanted to be able to test the entire system, but we didn't want to expose users to something that hadn't been fully tested. And so what we did is we merged the pull request to make it possible, but we hid the actual option for updating via the user interface by default. So that means that if you want to test out this functionality, which is what a lot of us community members are going to be doing that worked on this feature, you can edit the installer.settings.json file, the config file, to enable the ability to turn on core updates And so that main functionality that we've been talking about that we thought that was ready for weeks or even months now, we merged that in, but we hid it. And then we filed a follow-up, issue 3271, to enable that functionality by default in 1.12. There's also some other discussion in there that potentially we could make it so that you could turn on and off all of the installer capabilities. Like maybe it would be useful to allow users to update their modules, but disallow the ability to install new modules, for example. And so we could provide settings for every individual type of extension and whether or not you could install or update it. So that issue might turn into something like that, or it might literally just be, let's just flip the switch and turn on the ability to have core updates. Because right now, that's the only option that exists, is that core updates are disabled by default, but can be enabled by modifying the config file directly. So that's very exciting. Did take one step closer towards making it so that we can have automatic updates in the future. Also in the automatic updates category, package signing, issue 1992, still in progress. We did not proceed any further on that issue prior to release, but we still have it on our docket to improve the delivery of zip files to people's sites and ensure that they came exclusively from backdropcms.org. And we have another issue that is not completed, but is still a candidate for 1.12, and that is to deprecate authorized.php. We're not planning on removing authorized.php at this point in time, but because of the issues discussed, or concepts discussed in that issue 3208, we would like to deprecate and remove our usage of authorized.php in core as soon as possible. Because we're not actually adding any new features, we're probably, for the most part, just going to add @deprecated to a bunch of doc blocks throughout Backdrop core. 3208 is still a possible thing for us to include in the next week before 1.11 is released. Also in the category things that wasn't completed but is in great shape for the next release is tags for modules, issue number 37. I'm not going to recap that one, but there's been a lot of great discussion this past week, and even though it didn't get into 1.11, it's also in really great shape for 1.12. So that's it for the core update. There is still the issue tracker for 1.11 issues. I don't think that we've cleaned it up quite yet, but I think we'll do that shortly, bumping everything that didn't get completed into 1.12 or putting it back into the general 1.x pool. Do you have anything to say about that, Jen? Okay.
It might be good to coordinate on some of these things with you to figure out if they can still go in or not. Like, yeah, there's some stuff that I don't know if it would qualify for a user experience cleanup or if it involves too much functionality for that. But
right. Yeah, we allow UX improvements even between bug fix versions. So like 1.11.0 and 1.11.1, 1.11.1. And so, yeah, we do allow that before code freeze or before release as well, but we try to limit it purely because we don't want to introduce any kind of regressions. And UX changes, even though they're allowed, they could potentially cause, cause bugs, and we want to limit that as much as possible. So basically, it depends.
Yeah, so some of them are pretty clear that like it's going to be a good feature, and I think our rule last release, Nate, was that if it needed additional testing, then it couldn't go in. So I'll try and do a first prune of the list and pick the ones that definitely aren't going to make it. But it would be good to, check some of the other ones and be like, how big a feature is this? Is this still possible?
Yeah, that would be great. But let's have that discussion on each issue that needs it. But it would be good for us to clean up the 1.11 milestone as soon as possible, so that people have a kind of a list of things that they should be focusing on before the release. Ideally, that list should only contain 2 or 3 things, because it really should be like, these are the last couple of issues that prepare us for release next week. Is that next week? It's next weekend, so it's kind of close enough. Yeah, also, in case you're curious, September 15th lands on a Saturday, but unlike Feature Freeze, which we tend to allow for the extra weekend, releases are always exactly on the 15th of the release month. So Backdrop 1.11 will be September 15th, even though it's on a Saturday. So just FYI. Okay, that's it for the core update. Do you guys have any questions or anything you guys would like updates or any comments on the things that we got completed?
There are a couple issues in the 1.11 queue that are bugs related to the new things we just put in. So they're also tagged with 1.11. Is that what you want them, or do you want them tagged with 10.2 instead?
If they're only in the 1.x branch, if they only affect 1.11, then they should be in 1.11.
Okay.
But if it affects both, then it should be in 1.10.2.
Okay. I think they're only in 1.11, so that's fine.
Are we going to be able to get the Pantheon upstream YAML committed? I don't know, Jen, if you saw the impact that the other PR, if you manually added a Pantheon YAML, not the Pantheon upstream YAML to your upstream, you'll get a merge conflict error. But if you added it to individual sites, it'll be ignored and work properly. But we got some of those other changes were merged in. But if you look at the way that looks in the dashboard now, the commit messages aren't being refactored in a way that kind of translates what they are, or what they mean to the Pantheon users. And I don't think, there aren't so many of us now, but that needs to be factored into the merge process, because if you just merge it with the commit message that was on it before, when it shows up in the dashboard, it isn't always clear what's going on. So I guess we didn't clarify that we probably didn't want to merge all of those independently, because it's just continually showing as upstream updates in all the dashboards. So you need to get a handle on that. But there are a bunch of open tickets in there that I don't think need to be open, but no one with permissions is closing them. So
okay, yeah, I saw your comments about some.
Yeah, so the only thing open, I think, is really the Drush compatibility. There's still more work to do. None of those are ready to go in. And I think the problem is what you identified a while ago is with the Pantheon configuration with this, not with so the approach Herb is using works, but it's a lot of files and very messy. So I'm hoping that Greg can tune back in and get that. And they seem to be really responsive to organizational upstreams actually getting this to work. So that's good. They aren't just treating this like multi-site on Pantheon or something else they don't truly support. What if we can get somebody to take a look at that before the backdrop core update? I would like to get that applied and not be applying everything at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, to recap a couple of things, Kevin, that were included. I merged in the pull request number 24 from the Backdrop Pantheon repo that adds the Pantheon API module. And like you said, whatever the commit message is, as soon as it gets merged into the master branch, that immediately shows up as an upstream update on everybody that has a backdrop project on Pantheon. And so when I merged that pull request, I also updated the commit message to make it a little bit more end user friendly, because the commit message shows up literally in the backdrop or in the Pantheon dashboard. So I think as far as the maintainers are concerned, we should instigate some kind of policy around when you merge, always squash, and when you squash, make sure that it's a message that is end user friendly. Make it so that that they show up properly. It is also a little bit challenging that literally every commit, if we have multiple pull requests, they will actually be separate commits, and every single one of those will show up as a separate thing to people on Pantheon.
Yeah, it's a little easier when the changes are being made to a separate repo and being pulled in like the official Pantheon repos for WordPress and Drupal. Then you end up with a dashboard message that is just the update, the merge message, not the individual commit merges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what happens when we do core updates as well. That we do a merge, and then the merge commit message is the one that shows up. Yeah. Do we have it as part of this? I see that there's adding the pantheon.yaml file and updating PHP and setting the files directory, all of which are great ideas. Is there also an issue for changing the doc root to use a nested one instead of the root? Is that part of these suggested changes, or is that something completely different?
No. So the only real incentive for doing that would be if you could move your configuration files outside of the doc root, but you can't do that on Pantheon because you can't get anything that's writable that's not the files directory. So we have to solve that problem first. Or we don't have to, but it would make sense to do those things together rather than just moving files around without any other gain.
Okay, well, good. Well, that means that I was worried about moving the files around because I think that would probably be a massive change that would probably cause all kinds of merge conflicts for everybody out there. And I'm actually kind of relieved that that's not yet a concern for us. Great. So that means that we can get these pantheon.yaml files added that improve the compatibility with Pantheon and doesn't cause massive headaches for everybody that has ever set up a backdrop site. Okay, great. It's the best of both worlds for now. Okay, thanks, Kevin. Anything else that you guys would like to add or update regarding the upcoming 1.11 release? No? Okay. Let's see. There's something else I wanted to mention.
Your crazy idea about versioning?
Yeah, that was it. Okay, so let's okay, that's it for the 1.11 update. Now, this is not official. This is just crazy idea that I've been bouncing around. And it has to do with breaking compatibility with Backdrop or with the previous versions of Backdrop. And I think we've talked about, when will Backdrop 2 happen? If it, and what does that mean? Are we ready to break compatibility with all of Contrib, which we're not right now? But in the future, when would we be ready to say, okay, all of Contrib now needs to be updated for Backdrop 2, even though Backdrop 2 is ideally nothing but the removal of all of the deprecated stuff, right? So then you would have a major API break that would just say everything that's deprecated is now all gone, and everybody has to update their Contrib modules all at the same time to say that they're Backdrop 2 compatible. The crazy idea that I have is that instead of having a major break like that comes every couple of years that causes this massive upgrade headache for everybody all at once, is that we pivot from the concept of major releases on a very long interval to every Backdrop minor release is a major release. And so basically we lop the 1 off of backdrop, and we say the next release theoretically would be backdrop 12, followed by backdrop 13, followed by backdrop 14. And we adopt the model that browsers have adopted, that, we're on like Chrome, 73 or Firefox 60 or who knows what version, and it doesn't really matter. The major versions, although they are making minor API breaks in between versions, for the most part, plugins and extensions and everything still continue to function across versions. And the span of things being deprecated becomes much longer. So it makes it so that we can deprecate functionality. And then based on the popularity or usage of that feature, we can drop it at some arbitrary time into the future. So we might have 20 releases of Backdrop before we drop a deprecated feature, or we might only have 4 releases of Backdrop before we have a deprecated feature. And this allows us to drop deprecated functionality in a staggered manner instead of having one massive API break that happens all at once. It does also mean that modules would probably say they would work under the assumption that they always work forever. There would never be a Backdrop 2 where it was assumed that compatibility was broken. Instead, compatibility would be assumed up until a certain point, and then if a particular feature were deprecated or removed, we could potentially detect or use that to say these features, these modules are no longer compatible because they use the deprecated features that were removed. I don't know how automated we could get
then in a module, you would say you would add to your info file for if I already have a 1.6 out, I would have to add to my info file for 1.6 that it only worked up to Backdrop. So for example, let's pretend it's Rabbit Hole, right? And we just added some new feature into 1.12 for Rabbit Hole, or 1.12. What are we on now? I'm confused. Anyway, we add a new feature, but then I want the old version of Rabbit Hole to only work up to today's version of Backdrop, and tomorrow's version of Backdrop, I need a new version of Rabbit Hole. And so the new version would say, starts at 1.12 plus, but the old version would need to say 1.12, 1.11 and
lower. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you then add that change to an existing version of a module?
You'd probably have to say, Rabbit Hole 1 versus Rabbit Hole 2.
Right. But if Rabbit Hole 1 is already out and people already have it installed, how do I put a limit on that code that they're already running?
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
These are kind of some unsolved things. And that's why I said this is only a crazy idea. At this point, this isn't anything official. It's just kicking around some crazy things.
I like this crazy idea of backwards compatibility where everything becomes deprecated before it gets removed, and we can't just change something that breaks without some kind of compatibility layer. I'm a little bit worried that might not always be possible, depending on the kinds of things we want to change. And that was why when we originally made our principles, we didn't say 100% always backwards compatible like WordPress did. We said it's important, just because we felt like there were some significant things we were changing where that kind of change was going to be necessary. So I think over the past 4 years, we've proven that we can do an awful lot with marking things deprecated and adding new things. But I wonder where that limit is, and if we're going to end up limiting Backdrop if we commit to never doing that, or how we would handle it when we do need to make that kind of change.
I just throw in that we deal with this all the time in composer-based projects with not just greater than or less than, but literally it's not compatible with these 6 versions of this other project. And then depending on how well or poorly those compatibility lists are maintained in the manifest files and the size of the project, you end up with incompatible builds. And so the ability to maintain those with the number of modules that large sites have seems problematic.
I think for the short term, I would prefer to stick with our current numbering, but adopt the policy of deprecate first, remove later as like an official policy, and continue with that for, I don't know, the foreseeable future. And when we decide we can't go on without major API change, we figure out how to do that in a way that's least impactful to people running Backdrop. And if that means at that point we commit to like, oh, if we're on 143 and we change it to 43 and we become more like WordPress or browsers, then that's fine. But maybe we are going to need a 2.x branch that does things completely differently.
Yeah, the one key thing that I'm trying to figure out a way around is the like sudden, the dropping of a new version of Backdrop that potentially might not even include any new features, that just removes all the deprecated stuff. And then every module out there all has to, update basically. But I don't know.
I still think there's a way we can try and figure out how to make every one of our new releases only drop deprecated things so that a module can be compatible with 2 major versions at the same time.
Yeah.
And then we can like introduce new things. I agree that it's going to be hard to figure out like where do you draw the line if every version does that already. But I think like having one point in time where it's like this, like Backdrop 2 is where we delete everything that has been marked deprecated in all of Backdrop 1, except for maybe the last release or something like that. And then that way it gives everybody time through the entire 1.x cycle to resolve all those issues with deprecated APIs. And then at least that if you're running a contrib project and a new version comes out and you don't want anything to be different from Backdrop 2 for Backdrop 1, you just hit the update button and nothing should change, right? You shouldn't need to like replace all of your modules or rewrite your theme or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. One of the things that we have set up currently, though, is that Backdrop itself and the way the project module works is that it will segment by major version. So if you were a maintainer, you would be required to have the Backdrop 2 version of your module and the Backdrop 1 version of your module, even if they were the same thing, which is a little strange.
Maybe we could change the way the info files work so that the version number, like the packaging script, could add multiple like core compatibility lines to existing projects or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's another option, that we can have core or Backdrop be the Backdrop key be multiple things instead of just one.
Yeah.
And that would make it so there was a single thing. We also need to rename, like work out a branching strategy, because right now we have the major version prefixed before the module version number. And
yeah, so there's a lot of technical challenges whichever way we go. But I think it is good for us to think about like, we have this commitment to backwards compatibility. We've been able to get a really long way in 4 years by adding features without needing to do any API breaks. Let's take a look at the way that Drupal has historically done it and figure out if that's still a good match for what Backdrop's going to be doing in the future. And if not, let's play with some of these other options and see, like, is it possible to support 2 major versions? Is it possible to drop the major version number? Like, what are the ramifications of each of those, and think them through. So I like crazy ideas because sometimes they make you land on something not crazy that you wouldn't have thought of if you hadn't started in the crazy idea. So yeah, I think it's a good thought experiment.
Yeah, Kevin posted in Gitter, he had an interesting idea that version compatibility could be fed from an endpoint, like could be fed from backdropcms.org instead of from the .info files.
Yeah.
So the compatibility could be retroactively applied.
Yeah. I like that.
Interesting. Okay, well, that was the crazy idea. Just something to kick around out there for all of you Backdrop peeps out there. I've been kicking it around, and I pitched it to Jen this past week, and it didn't come out as crazy as it sounded in my head. So that was good. So we thought we'd share.
It started pretty crazy. And I was like,
yeah.
wait, what?
Yeah. I was like, no, the minor versions become major versions. Yeah, we just don't have major versions anymore, except they're all major versions. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I think we should just not call them minor versions and call them feature versions.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one of the things that makes me think about it this way is that we have had, I think, maybe a half dozen API breaks since Backdrop 1 came out. They've been minor, but they have occurred. And that means that some modules, some exceptional situations, you might not be able to update from Backdrop 1.2 to 1.3 because there was some minor API break in there. And so that means that at least a couple of times we've treated minor versions as majors. They really should have been majors. And if you wanted to get really stickler about our semantic versioning, we're not doing it right. And if you bump the major version every release, then that would allow us to do those minor releases and have them actually be semantic versioning, even though we would still minimize it as much as possible. So we basically would continue doing exactly what we're doing right now. Every major version wouldn't be guaranteed to have API breaks. It would just, like, every time you add in new features, it would be another major instead of the way that we're handling it now. We also cheat every now and then, and we include UX features in bug fix releases. And if we switch to this, then UX features or string changes, for example, might end up being in the minor releases, and bug fixes would literally be exclusively bug fixes. So it would make it so that we would actually follow the rules of semantic versioning, even if we didn't. We would take the idea of major versions, and they wouldn't really be that major, you know, like not the way that Drupal has treated major versions in the past, at least.
Yeah, I think the only problem I have with that is, like, conceptually, the idea of doing a major version update stresses me out, and probably anyone that comes from Drupal would be stressed out by that thought. And so we would need to do a really good job of making sure to communicate, like, no, it's the same thing that you've been dealing with Backdrop since the beginning. Nothing's going to change except for the numbers. And also have, like, really clearly define what does that mean in terms of, you know, your contrib modules you're maintaining. So I definitely think we would need to sort that out and make sure we had a really clear path for not only people who are running the software who are worried about it, but also people who are maintaining.
Yep. Yeah. And every now and then there would be the inevitable, you know, large deprecation that actually did get removed, akin to Firefox Quantum coming out and dropping support for their old plugin system, for example, or I guess prior to that, you know, like when Google Hangouts stopped working, you know, like every now and then there would be a dreaded release that was like, oh, you can't go past version 40 because all kinds of stuff breaks then, you know. So yeah, I don't know. Okay, let's drop it and be done with that. It's yeah, something to think about. Do we have anything else that you guys would like to bring up or mention, or things that we should add to the agenda for next week?
I just wanted to thank everybody who was working so hard over the weekend on all of the amazing new features that are going into the next version of Backdrop. So there's a huge flurry of activity, not just over the weekend, actually, in the last few weeks. So it's really great to see that. Yeah,
and even more so, perhaps, to the people that worked so hard on features that didn't make it. You know, thank you for your patience and for your effort working on those things that we'll try our best to get it into the next release. And sorry about any disappointment you may have felt about not getting your feature in. But it's a great thing about, 3 times a year releases is that there's always the next one, and it's only 4 months away. So yeah, thanks. I'll add my thanks to everybody that worked on this release. It's been very exciting, and I think 1.11 is going to be pretty kick-ass. So thank you. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's not celebrate too soon. We still have 1 more week to go. So let's keep working and make 1.11 great. So thanks, everybody. See you guys next week.
Bye.